The blood on Bethany Bennett's hands wouldn't wash away, no matter how hard she scrubbed them in the creek behind the boarding house in Amarillo, Texas. Though she knew it was only in her mind now, a phantom stain from that terrible night 6 months ago when her husband Thomas had died in her arms after the stagecoach robbery gone wrong. She'd been 22 when she married him, 23 when she buried him, and now at 24 she felt ancient, hollowed out, like one of those dried husks of corn that blew through the dusty streets when the wind picked up across the plains. Bethany stood from the creek bank, drying her hands on her worn apron, and made her way back toward the boarding house where she'd been working since arriving in Amarillo 3 months prior. The year was 1878, and Texas was still finding its footing after the war and Reconstruction, still wild enough that a woman alone had to be careful, still civilized enough that she could find work if she kept her head down and didn't ask for much. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Garrett, was a stern woman but fair, and she'd given Bethany a small room in exchange for cooking, cleaning, and helping with the guests who came through, mostly cattlemen and traders passing through on their way to somewhere else. The sun was setting over Amarillo, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded Bethany of better times, before Thomas had gotten it in his head that they needed more money, before he'd fallen in with those men who convinced him that robbing a Wells Fargo stage would be easy money. She pushed the memory away as she entered through the back door of the boarding house, the smell of bread baking filling the kitchen. She'd left the dough rising earlier, and now it was time to get it in the oven before the supper rush. Mrs. Garrett appeared in the doorway, her gray hair pulled back in its customary tight bun. "We have a new boarder arriving this evening, young Cowboy looking for work at one of the ranches nearby. I'll need you to prepare the room at the end of the hall." Bethany nodded, wiping flour from her hands. "Yes, madam, I'll see to it right away." "And Bethany," Mrs. Garrett's voice softened slightly, which was rare. "He seems like a decent sort, polite, not like some of the rougher types we get through here." Bethany understood the implication. Mrs. Garrett had been trying, in her own way, to encourage Bethany to consider the idea of marriage again, to find security in a new husband. But Bethany's heart had closed up tight as a fist after Thomas died, and she had no intention of opening it again. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. She made up the room with fresh linens, swept the floor, and placed a clean pitcher of water on the washstand. By the time she finished, the sun had fully set, and she heard the sound of boots on the front porch, followed by a knock. Mrs. Garrett answered the door, and Bethany heard the low rumble of a man's voice, polite and measured, just as Mrs. Garrett had said. Bethany busied herself in the kitchen, pulling the bread from the oven and starting on the stew for supper. She heard footsteps on the stairs as Mrs. Garrett showed the new boarder to his room, and then the older woman appeared in the kitchen doorway. "His name is Aaron Sullivan," Mrs. Garrett said. "He'll be taking his meals with us. Said he'd be down shortly." The name meant nothing to Bethany, and she went about her work, stirring the stew and slicing the fresh bread. When Aaron Sullivan finally appeared in the dining room, she carried out the food without really looking at him, setting the dishes on the table where he sat alone, it being too early yet for the other boarders to come down. "Thank you, madam," he said, and something in his voice made her glance up. He was young, probably around her own age or maybe a year or two older, with dark hair that needed a trim and eyes that were a startling shade of blue. His face was tanned from long days in the sun, and his hands, resting on the table, were calloused and strong. But what struck her most was the gentleness in his expression, the way he looked at her without the hardness or calculation she'd grown accustomed to seeing in men's eyes. "You're welcome," she said quietly, then turned to go back to the kitchen. Might I know your name?" He called after her, and she paused in the doorway. "Bethany," she said without turning around. "Bethany Bennett. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Mrs. Bennett." She didn't correct his assumption about her married status, didn't tell him she was a widow. It was easier to let people think she was still married, that there was some man somewhere who might object if they got too familiar. She disappeared into the kitchen and stayed there until she heard him finish his meal and climb the stairs back to his room. The next morning, Aaron was up before dawn, and Bethany found him in the kitchen when she came down to start breakfast. He was standing by the back door, looking out at the lightening sky. "Couldn't sleep," he said by way of explanation. "Hope you don't mind me being down here." "It's fine," Bethany said, moving past him to stoke the fire in the stove. "I'll have coffee ready shortly." "I can help with that," he offered, and before she could protest, he was filling the coffee pot with water from the pump. She watched him work, efficient and sure, clearly a man who was used to doing for himself. They worked in silence for a while, Bethany mixing batter for flapjacks while Aaron got the coffee going. It should have felt awkward, this stranger in her kitchen, but instead it felt oddly comfortable, like they'd done this dance before. "You have family in Amarillo?" Aaron asked as he poured them both cups of coffee. Bethany shook her head. "No, I came here for work. You?" "Same. Heard there were ranches hiring cowboys for the season. Figure I'll try my luck at the Double R Ranch, about 10 miles north of town." "What brings you to Texas?" She surprised herself by asking, not usually one to make conversation with the boarders. Aaron was quiet for a moment, sipping his coffee. "Needed a fresh start, I suppose. Lost my parents last year to fever up in Kansas. Farm didn't feel like home anymore without them. Sold it and decided to try my hand at cowboying. Always been good with horses." There was grief in his voice, but it was the kind that had been worn smooth by time, not the sharp, jagged kind that still cut Bethany whenever she thought of Thomas. She recognized a fellow traveler on the road of loss. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "Thank you. It gets easier, they tell me." "The missing them?" Bethany didn't respond to that, wasn't sure she believed it, but she appreciated that he didn't push. They fell back into silence, and when the other boarders began to stir upstairs, Aaron thanked her for the coffee and headed out to find the Double R Ranch. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Aaron would rise early, come down to the kitchen where Bethany was already working, and they'd share coffee and quiet conversation before he headed out for the day. He'd gotten hired at the Double R Ranch, working with the horses as he'd hoped, and he came back each evening tired but satisfied, with stories about the Mustangs they were breaking and the cattle they were preparing for the drive north. Bethany found herself listening to his stories, found herself asking questions, found herself looking forward to those early morning hours before the rest of the world woke up. But whenever she felt herself softening toward him, whenever she caught herself smiling at something he said, she pulled back, reminded herself of all the reasons she couldn't let anyone in again. Aaron seemed to sense her boundaries and never pushed, never asked for more than she was willing to give. He was patient in a way that both comforted and unnerved her. It would have been easier if he'd been pushy or arrogant, if she could have found a reason to dislike him. But he was just kind, consistently and genuinely kind, and that was harder to defend against. One morning, about 2 weeks after Aaron had arrived, Bethany was carrying water from the pump when she slipped on a patch of mud. The bucket went flying, and she would have fallen hard if Aaron hadn't appeared seemingly out of nowhere, catching her by the arm and steadying her. "Careful," he said, his hand warm on her arm even through her sleeve. She jerked away as if burned, her heart pounding. "I'm fine." "I know you are," Aaron said mildly, no offense in his voice. "But that doesn't mean you can't accept a hand when you need one." "I don't need one," Bethany said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. "I don't need anyone." She saw something flicker in Aaron's eyes, understanding maybe or sadness, but he just nodded and picked up the bucket she dropped. "I'll get the water. You go on inside." Bethany fled to the kitchen, angry at herself for overreacting, angry at him for being so understanding, angry at the whole situation. She didn't want to need anyone. Needing people meant trusting them, and trusting them meant they could hurt you, could leave you, could die in your arms while you screamed for help that never came. She avoided Aaron for the rest of that day, taking her meals in the kitchen while he ate in the dining room, staying upstairs when she knew he'd be downstairs. But the next morning, when she came down before dawn, he was there as usual, and he greeted her the same way he always did, as if their exchange the day before had never happened. "Morning, Bethany. Coffee." And just like that, they fell back into their routine. He didn't push, didn't demand an explanation or an apology. He just was, steady and constant as the sunrise, and Bethany found herself slowly, reluctantly, beginning to trust that maybe he'd still be there tomorrow. Spring turned toward summer, and Aaron continued working at the Double R Ranch while boarding with Mrs. Garrett. He'd made it clear he was planning to stay in Amarillo long-term, had even mentioned saving up to buy his own small spread someday. The town was growing, more people arriving every week, and there was opportunity for a man willing to work hard. One Saturday, Mrs. Garrett announced she was visiting her sister in Fort Worth for a week and would be leaving Bethany in charge of the boarding house. It would be the first time Bethany had been left with such responsibility, and she was both proud and nervous. "You'll do fine," Mrs. Garrett assured her. "And Mr. Sullivan has offered to help with any heavy work that needs doing while I'm gone. He's a good man, Bethany. You can trust him." There was that word again. Trust. Bethany nodded and said nothing. The first few days of Mrs. Garrett's absence went smoothly. Bethany managed the cooking and cleaning, kept the books, and handled the comings and goings of the various boarders. Aaron helped without being asked, fixing a loose step on the back porch, repairing a shutter that had come loose in a windstorm, chopping extra wood for the stove. On the fourth evening, a man arrived at the boarding house asking for a room. There was something about him that set Bethany on edge immediately, something in the way his eyes moved over her that made her skin crawl. But she needed the money from the room, so she showed him upstairs and told him supper would be ready within the hour. His name was Clyde Morris, and he said he was a cattleman passing through on his way to Kansas. At supper, he sat at the table drinking whiskey from a flask and making comments that bordered on inappropriate, though never quite crossing the line enough that Bethany could ask him to leave. Aaron was late coming back from the ranch that evening, and Bethany found herself wishing he were there, even as she chided herself for wanting to rely on anyone. When the meal was over and the other boarders had retired to their rooms, Clyde lingered in the dining room and Bethany hurried to clear the dishes. "You're a pretty thing," Clyde said, his words slightly slurred. "Awful pretty to be working as a maid. I'm the proprietor while Mrs. Garrett is away," Bethany said firmly, keeping the table between them. "And I'll ask you to keep a civil tongue, sir." "Civil," Clyde laughed. "I'm being plenty civil, just making conversation with a lonely widow woman." Bethany's hand stilled on the dishes. "How did you know I was a widow?" "Saw it in your eyes," Clyde said, standing and moving around the table toward her. "A woman who's lost her man has a certain look, makes her vulnerable, makes her need protection." "I don't need anything from you," Bethany said, backing toward the kitchen door. "Please go to your room." "Now, that's not very friendly," Clyde said, reaching for her arm. The front door opened at that moment, and Aaron walked in, taking in the scene with one quick glance. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture did, a subtle shift that made him seem bigger, more imposing. "Evening," Aaron said pleasantly, but there was steel underneath the politeness. "Everything all right, Bethany?" Mr. Morris was just heading up to his room, Bethany said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Clyde looked between them, seemed to calculate his odds, and apparently decided discretion was the better part of valor. "Just being friendly," he muttered, then headed for the stairs. When he was gone, Bethany let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Aaron moved to the kitchen, giving her space, not crowding her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You don't have to thank me, but I think maybe I should sleep down here on the sofa while Mrs. Garrett is away, just to be safe." Bethany wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle things herself, but the truth was she'd been frightened, and having Aaron downstairs would let her sleep easier. All right. That night, Aaron made up a bed on the sofa in the front parlor, and Bethany locked herself in her small room off the kitchen. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the house settling, thinking about Aaron downstairs, about the fact that she'd accepted his help, about how that didn't feel like weakness the way she'd expected it to. The next morning, Clyde Morris checked out early, muttering something about needing to get on the road. Bethany was relieved to see him go. Aaron said nothing about it, just helped her strip the bed and prepare the room for the next guest. "You could have asked me to make him leave," Aaron said as they worked. "You're in charge, you have that right." "I needed the money from the room," Bethany admitted. "Mrs. Garrett depends on every booking. Not more than she depends on you being safe," Aaron said firmly. "Money's not worth that." "Nothing is." Bethany looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the conviction in his eyes. He believed what he was saying. He actually cared about her well-being more than the profit from a room rental. "Thomas used to say money was the most important thing," she found herself saying, the words coming out before she could stop them. "That's why he tried to rob that stage, why he died." Aaron was quiet for a moment, smoothing the fresh sheets on the bed. "Your husband?" "Yes, 6 months ago. He fell in with bad men, men who convinced him that stealing was easier than working. They shot him when the robbery went wrong, and the law didn't care that he'd been led astray. They just wanted someone to blame." The story poured out of her, words she hadn't spoken to anyone since arriving in Amarillo. "I couldn't stay in our town after that. Everyone looked at me like I was a criminal too, like his choices were somehow my fault. So I left, came here, started over." "I'm sorry," Aaron said, and the simple words held a weight of genuine sympathy. "That's a heavy thing to carry alone." "I'm used to being alone," Bethany said, though the words rang hollow even to her own ears. "Being used to something doesn't mean it's good for you," Aaron replied gently. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let people help us carry our burdens." Bethany wanted to argue, wanted to retreat behind her walls, but she was tired of carrying everything alone, tired of pretending she was fine, tired of being afraid. "I don't know how to do that anymore. How to trust." "Then maybe we start small," Aaron suggested. "Let me help you with the boarding house this week. Let me be your friend, nothing more, nothing you're not ready for, just a friend, a friend." That seemed manageable. That seemed like something she might be able to handle. "All right." Aaron's face broke into a smile, genuine and warm, and Bethany felt something in her chest loosen just a fraction. They finished making the bed and went downstairs to start breakfast. And when Aaron poured her coffee like he always did, Bethany let herself smile back. The rest of the week passed peacefully. True to his word, Aaron was a friend, helping with the boarding house work, making her laugh with stories from the ranch, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. When Mrs. Garrett returned from Fort Worth, she found everything in perfect order and seemed pleased with how Bethany had managed. "Mr. Sullivan tells me you handled things beautifully," Mrs. Garrett said. "I'm proud of you, dear." Bethany felt a glow of accomplishment. It had been a long time since she'd felt proud of herself for anything. Summer deepened into July, and the heat in Amarillo became oppressive, the kind of heat that made every movement feel like wading through honey. Aaron came home from the ranch, each day covered in dust and sweat, and Bethany made sure there was cool water waiting for him, made sure he had hearty meals to keep up his strength. She told herself she did the same for all the boarders, which was true, but she couldn't deny that she took extra care with Aaron's needs. Couldn't deny that her day felt more complete when he walked through the door each evening. Couldn't deny that she looked forward to their morning talks more than anything else in her day. One particularly hot evening, Aaron suggested they take a walk after supper to catch whatever breeze might be stirring. Bethany hesitated, aware that a walk together might be seen as courting, but the boarding house was stifling and she longed for fresh air, so she agreed. They walked through the streets of Amarillo as the sun set, heading toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange and purple, and the breeze that finally picked up smelled of sage and grass. "It's beautiful here," Aaron said, looking out over the plains. "Different from Kansas, more open, more possibility." "What kind of possibility?" Bethany asked. "The possibility of building something new, something good, a life that matters." He glanced at her. "What about you? What do you want to build?" No one had asked her that before. Thomas had always told her what they were going to do, what he was going to build, and her job was just to support him. But Aaron was asking what she wanted. "I don't know," she admitted. "I used to want a family, a home, security, but those dreams died with Thomas." "Or maybe they're just sleeping," Aaron suggested. "Maybe they're waiting for you to feel safe enough to dream them again." Bethany felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. "I don't know if I'll ever feel that safe again." Aaron stopped walking and turned to face her. "Bethany, I know you've been hurt. I know you have every reason not to trust anyone, especially not some cowboy you've only known a few months, but I need you to know something." She waited, her heart pounding. "I'm not going anywhere," Aaron said firmly. "I'm not going to die robbing stages or make foolish choices that put you in danger. I'm just going to be here day after day, showing up and doing right by you, until maybe someday you can believe that not everyone leaves, that some people stay." "You can't promise that," Bethany whispered. "Anything could happen. You're right. I could get kicked by a horse tomorrow. You could catch fever next week. None of us know what's coming. But I can promise that as long as I draw breath, I'll choose to be here. I'll choose you. Every single day." The tears spilled over then, and Bethany didn't try to stop them. Aaron pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her, but he didn't try to embrace her, didn't take advantage of her vulnerable moment. He just stood there, steady and patient as always. "Why?" Bethany asked, wiping her eyes. "Why me? Why do you care so much?" Aaron was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "I watched my mother care for my father through his final days, watched her hold him and comfort him and love him right up until his last breath. And then I watched grief nearly destroy her, watched her struggle to find reasons to keep going. But you know what she told me right before she passed herself?" Bethany shook her head. "She said she'd do it all again. Every moment of joy, every moment of pain, because love was worth it. The time she had with my father was worth the cost of losing him." Aaron's voice was thick with emotion. "You've been hurt, Bethany, but you're still standing, still kind, still beautiful inside and out. That takes courage, and I admire the hell out of that courage. I admire you." No one had ever said anything like that to Bethany before. She didn't know what to say, how to respond to such raw honesty. I can't promise I won't hurt you, Aaron continued. I'm human. I'll make mistakes, but I can promise I'll never do it on purpose. I'll never betray you or deceive you or put my own wants above your needs. And I can promise that if you give me a chance, I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of your trust. That's a big promise, Bethany managed. Yes, it is. And I don't make it lightly. He looked at her with those steady blue eyes. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm not even asking you to call me your beau. I'm just asking you to let me keep showing up. Let me keep earning your trust one day at a time. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, maybe we can see what might grow between us. Bethany thought about it, really thought about it. Thought about how Aaron had been nothing but kind and patient since the day he'd arrived. Thought about how he'd protected her from Clyde Morris without being asked. Thought about how he made her laugh, made her feel safe, made her remember what it was like to enjoy someone's company. Thought about how he'd just offered her the thing she needed most, time and patience and the freedom to heal at her own pace. All right, she said finally, you can keep showing up. Aaron's smile was brighter than the sunset behind him. Thank you. You won't regret it, Bethany, I swear to you. They walked back to the boarding house in comfortable silence, and that night, Bethany slept better than she had in months. True to his word, Aaron showed up. Every morning he was in the kitchen for coffee. Every evening he came home and told her about his day. Every weekend he found small ways to help around the boarding house, fixing things that needed fixing, helping with tasks that were too heavy for Bethany to manage alone. But he also gave her space when she needed it, never crowded her, never demanded more than she was ready to give. When she had bad days, days when the memories of Thomas were too sharp and she withdrew into herself, Aaron just quietly went about his business, letting her know he was there if she needed him but not forcing his presence on her. Slowly, week by week, Bethany found herself opening up. Found herself telling Aaron stories about her childhood, about her parents who'd passed when she was young, about her dreams and fears. Found herself asking about his life, about growing up on a farm in Kansas, about what he hoped for his future. August brought a break in the heat, and with it came the annual Amarillo Summer Festival, a celebration of the town's growing prosperity. There would be music and dancing, food and games, and Mrs. Garrett insisted that Bethany take the evening off to attend. You work too hard, dear, the older woman said. Go enjoy yourself. You're young. You should be dancing, not scrubbing floors. Bethany protested that she had nothing suitable to wear, but Mrs. Garrett wouldn't hear it. She pulled out a dress that had belonged to her daughter, who'd moved back east years ago, a pretty blue cotton with white trim that fit Bethany perfectly. When Aaron saw her that evening dressed for the festival, something shifted in his expression, a look of such open admiration that it made Bethany blush. You look beautiful, he said simply. Thank you, Bethany replied, smoothing the skirt self-consciously. Mrs. Garrett loaned me the dress. It's not the dress, Aaron said. It's you. You're beautiful, Bethany. I hope you know that. They walked to the town square together, where lanterns had been strung between the buildings and a small band was playing lively music. People were dancing, laughing, celebrating the relative prosperity the town had enjoyed that year. Bethany hadn't been to a social gathering since before Thomas died, and she felt nervous, out of place. Aaron seemed to sense her discomfort. We can leave any time you want, he said quietly. No pressure. But as they stood there watching the dancers, Bethany found herself wanting to stay, wanting to be part of the celebration, wanting to feel normal again. When Aaron offered his hand and asked if she'd like to dance, she surprised herself by saying yes. He led her onto the makeshift dance floor, and as his hand settled at her waist and he took her other hand in his, Bethany felt a flutter of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not grief, but anticipation. Hope, maybe. Aaron was a good dancer, confident but not showy, and he led her through the steps with ease. Bethany let herself relax into the music, into the movement, into the feeling of being held by someone she trusted, because she realized as they danced that she did trust Aaron. Somewhere along the way, through all those days of showing up, of being patient and kind and steady, he'd earned it. When the song ended and a slower tune began, Aaron pulled her a little closer, and Bethany let him, resting her head against his shoulder as they swayed to the music. She could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady, could feel the warmth of him, could smell the clean scent of soap and leather. "Is this all right?" Aaron asked softly, and she loved that he asked, loved that he always checked, always made sure she was comfortable. "Yes," she whispered. "It's perfect." They danced through several more songs before taking a break to get some lemonade and watch the other dancers. People came over to chat, and Bethany was struck by how many people seemed to know Aaron, how well-liked he was. The ranch hands from the Double R greeted him warmly. The shopkeepers treated him with respect. Even the town sheriff stopped by to shake his hand and compliment his work with the Mustangs. "You've made quite a place for yourself here," Bethany observed. Aaron shrugged. "Just trying to be useful. Be someone the community can count on." "You are," Bethany said. "You're all of that and more." As the evening wore on, Bethany found herself laughing more than she had in months, maybe years. Aaron had a dry wit that caught her by surprise, making jokes that were clever rather than crude, finding humor in everyday observations. He introduced her to people as his friend, never presuming more, and she appreciated his discretion even as part of her wished he'd claim her as something more. When did that shift happen? She wondered. When did she go from being terrified of letting him close to wishing he'd pull her closer? When did the thought of him leaving start to hurt more than the fear of being hurt again? They stayed at the festival until the lanterns began to burn low and the crowd started to thin. As they walked back to the boarding house, Bethany slipped her hand into Aaron's, and the smile he gave her was worth every risk she was taking. At the door of the boarding house, Aaron paused. "I had a wonderful time tonight, Bethany. Thank you for letting me escort you." "I had a wonderful time too," Bethany said and meant it. "Aaron, she paused, trying to find the right words. "I want you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to let go of the fear, to trust again." "You make that easier." Aaron lifted his free hand and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away a strand of hair the wind had blown across her face. "You set the pace, Bethany. I'll be right here, whatever speed you need to go." She thought he might kiss her then, and part of her wanted him to, but he just squeezed her hand gently and bid her good night. Bethany went upstairs to her room feeling lighter than she had in years, the blue dress swirling around her legs, her heart full of possibility. September brought cooler weather and the start of the fall cattle drives. The Double R Ranch would be sending a herd north to market, and Aaron had been asked to go along as one of the drovers. It would mean being gone for nearly a month, and when he told Bethany about it over their morning coffee, she felt her stomach drop. "A month," she repeated, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Maybe a bit less if we make good time. We'll be driving the herd to Dodge City, then I'll catch the train back down." He watched her carefully. "I don't have to go. I can tell the foreman I'd rather stay here." Bethany wanted to ask him to stay, wanted to beg him not to go, but she knew that wasn't fair. This was his job, his livelihood. She couldn't ask him to give that up just because she was afraid of being without him. "No, you should go," she said firmly. "It's a good opportunity. I'll be fine." "I know you'll be fine," Aaron said gently. "You're one of the strongest people I know, but that doesn't mean I want to leave you." "It's only a month," Bethany said, trying to convince herself as much as him. "We'll both survive a month." The week before Aaron was set to leave passed too quickly. He made arrangements for odd jobs around the boarding house to be handled by other men, checked and rechecked that Bethany would have everything she needed, and generally fussed over details until she had to laugh and tell him to stop worrying. The night before he left, they sat on the back porch of the boarding house, watching the stars come out. Aaron held her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I'm going to miss you," he said quietly. "More than I probably should, given that we're still figuring this out between us." "I'm going to miss you too," Bethany admitted. "I didn't think I would when you first said you were going. I thought I'd be relieved to have some space, but I'm not. I'm just going to miss you." Aaron turned to look at her, his eyes serious in the starlight. "Bethany, before I go, I need to tell you something. And you don't have to respond, don't have to say anything back. I just need you to know." Her heart started to pound. "All right. I love you," Aaron said simply. "I've loved you for months now, probably since those first mornings sharing coffee in the kitchen. I love your strength and your kindness, your laugh and your courage. I love the way you take care of everyone around you, even when you're hurting yourself. I love all of you, scars and fears and everything. And I need you to know that, need you to have that to hold on to while I'm gone." Bethany felt tears spring to her eyes. Part of her wanted to say it back, wanted to tell him that she loved him too, because she was pretty sure she did. But the words stuck in her throat, blocked by old fears, old wounds. "It's all right," Aaron said, seeing her struggle. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. Wanted you to know that when I come back, I'm coming back to you. You're what I'm working for, what I'm building toward. A future with you if you'll have me." "Aaron," Bethany whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I want that. I want to be able to say it back, but I'm still so scared." "I know," he said, pulling her into his arms, and this time she went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and letting herself be held. "Fear is reasonable given what you've been through, but fear doesn't have to win, Bethany. We get to choose what wins, and I'm choosing love. I'll keep choosing it every day until maybe you can choose it too." They sat like that for a long time, wrapped up in each other, and when Aaron finally walked her to her door, he kissed her forehead gently, tenderly, a promise of more to come when she was ready. The next morning, Aaron left with the cattle drive before dawn. Bethany didn't see him go, but when she came down to the kitchen, there was a note waiting for her on the table, written in his careful hand. "Dear Bethany, every sunrise I'm away, I'll think of our mornings together. Every sunset, I'll remember the way you smiled at the festival. And every star-filled night, I'll count the days until I can see you again. Be safe, be happy, be you. All my love, Aaron." Bethany folded the note carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket, carrying it with her throughout the day like a talisman. The first week without Aaron was harder than Bethany expected. She'd grown so accustomed to his presence, to their morning routine, to knowing he'd be there in the evening. The boarding house felt emptier, even though the same number of guests were staying there. Mrs. Garrett noticed Bethany's subdued mood, but, being a wise woman, said nothing, just gave Bethany extra tasks to keep her busy. By the second week, Bethany had fallen into a new rhythm. She found herself writing letters to Aaron, even though she wasn't sure where to send them. She wrote about her days, about the guests at the boarding house, about her thoughts and feelings. She wrote things she might not have been able to say to his face, poured her heart onto paper in a way that felt safe. In one letter, written late at night by candlelight, she finally wrote the words she hadn't been able to say. "I think I love you too. No, that's not true. I know I love you. I'm just still learning how to live with that love, how to trust it, how to trust myself with it. But it's there, Aaron. It's been growing all this time, even while I was afraid. Especially while I was afraid. because you showed me that love doesn't have to be frightening, that it can be gentle and patient and safe. You showed me that I can be myself, broken parts and all, and still be worthy of love. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything. Come home safe." She folded that letter and put it with the others, planning to give them all to Aaron when he returned. The third week brought a scare. News reached Amarillo that there had been trouble on one of the cattle drives heading north. Rustlers attacking a herd and several men being injured or killed. Bethany spent 2 days in agony, trying to find out which ranch had been affected, terrified that it might be the Double R herd. Finally, word came that it had been a different outfit, a ranch from further south. The Double R drive was fine, still on schedule to reach Dodge City within the week. Bethany nearly collapsed with relief, and it was in that moment that she realized just how deeply she'd let Aaron into her heart. The thought of losing him had been unbearable, physically painful. She couldn't go through that again, couldn't survive another loss like Thomas. But then she remembered what Aaron had said, what his mother had told him. That love was worth the risk, that the joy was worth the potential pain. And she realized that she had a choice. She could pull back, protect her heart, push Aaron away when he returned, or she could be brave. Could choose love despite the fear. She chose love. The fourth week dragged by, each day feeling longer than the last. Bethany found herself watching the road, hoping for news, counting down the days until Aaron should return. Mrs. Garrett had started making knowing comments about young love, and Bethany didn't even bother to deny it anymore. Finally, on a Thursday afternoon in early October, a rider from the Double R Ranch came into town with the news that the cattle drive had been successful, and the drovers would be returning on the Saturday train from Dodge City. Bethany felt her heart soar. Saturday morning, she woke before dawn and took extra care with her appearance, wearing her best dress and pinning her hair up carefully. Mrs. Garrett caught her checking her reflection in the kitchen window and smiled. "He's going to be just as smitten as the day he left," the older woman said. "Probably more so, now that he's had to miss you for a month." "I hope so," Bethany admitted, "because I have a lot to tell him." The train was scheduled to arrive at 2 in the afternoon. Bethany was at the station by 1, too nervous and excited to wait at the boarding house. She clutched the bundle of letters she'd written, her palms sweating despite the cool autumn air. When the train finally pulled into the station, belching steam and squealing to a stop, Bethany's heart felt like it might beat out of her chest. She watched the passengers disembark, scanning each face, and then she saw him. Aaron stepped down from the train car, dusty and tired from travel, his bag slung over his shoulder. He looked around the platform, clearly searching for something, someone, and then his eyes found her and his whole face lit up. He crossed the platform in long strides, dropping his bag, and Bethany met him halfway, throwing her arms around his neck as he lifted her off her feet and spun her around. "You're here," Aaron said, setting her down but not letting go, his arms tight around her waist. "I hoped you'd come, but I wasn't sure." "Of course I'm here," Bethany said, pulling back just enough to look at his face, to reassure herself that he was real, that he was safe, that he'd come back just like he promised. "I've been counting the days." "So have I," Aaron said, and then he kissed her, really kissed her, and Bethany kissed him back, putting into that kiss all the words she hadn't been able to say, all the love she'd been too afraid to express. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Aaron rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said again. "God, I missed you." "I love you too," Bethany said, and the words came easily this time, naturally, like they'd been waiting on her tongue for months, just looking for the right moment. "I love you, Aaron. I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it. And now," Aaron asked, hope and joy and love all mixed together in his expression. Now I'm choosing to be brave, Bethany said. I'm choosing you, I'm choosing us, if you still want that. If I still want it, Aaron laughed, a sound of pure happiness. Bethany Bennett, I've never wanted anything more in my life. He kissed her again, and Bethany felt like she was flying, felt like all the broken pieces inside her were finally starting to heal, to come together into something new and whole and beautiful. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, talking non-stop, trying to fit a month's worth of conversation into the short walk. Aaron told her about the cattle drive, about the long days in the saddle and the cold nights under the stars, about reaching Dodge City and seeing the price the cattle fetched, about how the success of the drive meant good bonuses for all the drovers. Bethany told him about her month, about the boarding house and the guests, about her fear when she'd heard about the rustlers, about the letters she'd written. Letters? Aaron asked, intrigued. Bethany pulled the bundle from her pocket and handed them to him. I wrote to you, even though I couldn't send them. I needed to feel like I was talking to you somehow. Aaron took the letters reverently, like they were precious treasures. Can I read them? That's why I brought them, Bethany said, blushing a little. Fair warning, I said some pretty sappy things in there. I can't wait, Aaron said, tucking them carefully into his jacket. At the boarding house, Mrs. Garrett greeted Aaron warmly and immediately set about preparing a special dinner to celebrate his safe return. The other boarders welcomed him back, and the evening turned into an impromptu celebration. After dinner, Aaron and Bethany slipped away to the back porch, their spot, and sat together in the cool evening air. Aaron had read the letters while Bethany was helping clean up from dinner, and his eyes were suspiciously bright as he took her hand. Those letters, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Bethany, they're the most beautiful things anyone's ever said to me. I meant every word, Bethany said. I know. That's what makes them so beautiful. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Bethany, I know we've only known each other for 6 months. I know that's not very long by most standards. But I also know that I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. I know that I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that you can trust me, that you're safe with me. I know that I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I know that I want to build a life with you, a family with you, a future with you. Bethany's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Aaron must be able to hear it. Aaron, wait, let me finish, he said, and then he was dropping to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. I bought this in Dodge City, with my bonus from the drive. I've been carrying it around for 2 days, trying to figure out the right time to ask, but I don't think there's ever going to be a perfect moment, so I'm just going to say it. He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small diamond, modest but beautiful. Bethany Bennett, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Would you let me spend the rest of my life earning your trust and your love? Would you build a future with me? Bethany looked at the ring, at Aaron's hopeful face, at the future he was offering her. She thought about Thomas, about the pain of losing him, about the fear that had ruled her life for so long. And then she thought about the past 6 months, about how Aaron had shown up every single day, had been patient and kind and steady, had proven over and over that he was worthy of her trust. She thought about her choice to be brave, to choose love over fear. Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, Aaron, I'll marry you. I want all of that. I want everything with you. Aaron stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Then he was kissing her again, and she was kissing him back, and they were both laughing and crying at the same time. Mrs. Garrett appeared in the doorway, took one look at them, and let out a whoop of joy. Finally, I was wondering when that boy was going to make an honest woman of you." The next few weeks passed in a blur of wedding preparations. Bethany and Aaron decided on a small ceremony in early November, just a few close friends and the boarding house residents. There was no point in waiting, they agreed. They'd both already waited long enough for happiness. Aaron had saved enough money for a down payment on a small ranch property about 5 miles outside of Amarillo, 20 acres with a house that needed work and a barn that needed even more work. But it was theirs, or it would be once they signed the papers after the wedding. Aaron planned to keep working at the Double R while building up their own herd, and Bethany would continue helping Mrs. Garrett part-time, at least until they started their family. The wedding day arrived, crisp and clear, with a blue sky that seemed to go on forever. Bethany wore a new dress, cream-colored with lace at the collar, that Mrs. Garrett had helped her sew. Aaron wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous and so full of love that Bethany felt her heart might burst. They were married by the town minister in the small church on Main Street, with Mrs. Garrett standing up as Bethany's matron of honor, and the ranch foreman from the Double R standing up as Aaron's best man. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Aaron kissed Bethany with such tenderness and joy that several people in the small congregation had to dab at their eyes. Afterward, there was a simple reception at the boarding house, with food and music and dancing. Bethany danced with her new husband, and this time when he held her close, she knew it was forever. This time she trusted it. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave for their new home, Mrs. Garrett pulled Bethany aside. "I'm proud of you, dear," the older woman said, her eyes misty. "You came here broken and afraid, and you've grown into such a strong, brave woman. You chose to heal, chose to trust again, chose to love again. That takes more courage than most people ever have to find." "I had good examples," Bethany said, hugging her, "and I had Aaron. He made it easy to be brave." "He's a good man," Mrs. Garrett agreed. "But you did the hard work. Don't forget that." Aaron and Bethany drove out to their new property in a wagon laden with their belongings, arriving just as the sun was setting. The house was small and rough, but it was theirs, and as Aaron carried Bethany over the threshold, both of them laughing, she felt a sense of homecoming she'd never experienced before. That night, they lay in their bed in their house, the windows open to let in the cool night air, and talked about their dreams for the future. "I want to build this ranch into something sustainable," Aaron said, running his fingers through Bethany's hair. "Something we can pass down to our children someday. I want to raise good horses, maybe some cattle, build a life that matters." "I want a family," Bethany said softly. "I want children running through these rooms, laughter filling this house. I want to build something with you that's good and true and lasting." "We'll build it together," Aaron promised. "All of it, one day at a time." And they did. The first year of their marriage was full of hard work and harder lessons. They learned how to run a ranch, how to manage livestock, how to coax crops from the stubborn Texas soil. They learned how to be married, how to communicate, how to work through disagreements and support each other through challenges. Aaron continued working at the Double R Ranch while building up their own small herd with his wages. Bethany took in sewing and helped Mrs. Garrett a few days a week, using her earnings to buy chickens and supplies for the house. It wasn't easy, but it was good, and they were happy. In the spring of 1879, Bethany realized she was expecting their first child. She told Aaron one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and the look of pure joy on his face was something she'd treasure forever. "A baby," he breathed, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Bethany asked, even though she could see that he was. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it," Aaron said, pulling her into his arms. Bethany, you've given me everything I ever wanted, a home, a purpose, love, and now a child. I'm the luckiest man alive." Their son was born in January of 1880, in the early morning hours just after a winter storm had passed through. Aaron paced outside the bedroom while the midwife attended to Bethany, and when he finally heard the baby's first cry, he burst through the door, unable to stay away a moment longer. "A boy," the midwife announced, handing the tiny bundle to Bethany. Healthy and strong. Aaron sat on the edge of the bed, looking down at his son with wonder. "He's perfect." "He is," Bethany agreed, feeling a surge of love so powerful it almost frightened her. But it was a good fear, the kind that came from having something precious to protect. They named him Thomas Aaron Sullivan, honoring both the past and the present, acknowledging where they'd come from while looking toward where they were going. Baby Thomas was a good baby, healthy and happy, and watching Aaron with their son made Bethany fall in love with her husband all over again. He was gentle and patient, changing diapers and walking the floor when the baby was fussy, singing lullabies in his deep voice that always seemed to calm Thomas down. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. By 1882, they had a decent herd of cattle and several good horses that Aaron had trained. Bethany's garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and extras to sell in town. They'd added on to the house, building 2 more bedrooms and a proper parlor, and in the fall of 1882, their daughter was born, a tiny girl with Bethany's dark hair and Aaron's blue eyes. They named her Sarah, after Aaron's mother, and she completed their family in a way Bethany hadn't even known was missing. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Bethany and Aaron's love deepened with each passing year. They had challenges, certainly. There were droughts and harsh winters, sick animals and failed crops, the normal struggles of ranch life. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Aaron surprised Bethany with a trip back to Amarillo, arranging for a neighbor to watch the children. They stayed at Mrs. Garrett's boarding house, in the same room Aaron had rented when he first arrived in town. "Remember when we met?" Aaron asked as they lay in bed that night. "You were so determined to keep everyone at arm's length, including me." "I was terrified," Bethany admitted. "Terrified of being hurt again, of losing someone else I loved. You could have given up on me so many times." "Never," Aaron said firmly. "I knew from the start that you were worth waiting for, worth working for. And I was right. These 10 years with you, building our life together, raising our children, they've been the best years of my life." "Mine too," Bethany said, and it was true. The pain of losing Thomas had faded to a distant ache, and while she'd never forget him or the lessons that loss had taught her, she'd found a love with Aaron that was deeper and truer than anything she'd experienced before. They made love that night with the tenderness and passion of long familiarity, and afterward, Bethany lay in Aaron's arms feeling utterly content. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For showing up. For being patient. For earning my trust one day at a time, just like you promised." Aaron kissed her forehead. "Thank you for letting me. Thank you for being brave enough to trust again, to love again. You gave me everything, Bethany." As the years continued to pass, the Sullivan Ranch became known throughout the area as a place of quality horses and honest dealing. Aaron's reputation for fairness and hard work earned him respect, and Bethany became known for her kindness and her way with difficult horses that even Aaron sometimes struggled with. Thomas and Sarah grew into fine young people. Thomas inherited his father's way with animals and his mother's determination, while Sarah had her father's easy charm and her mother's strength. They were good children, happy and healthy, and watching them grow was one of the greatest joys of Bethany's life. In 1888, Mrs. Garrett passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73. Bethany grieved the loss of the woman who'd given her a chance when she'd had nothing, who'd encouraged her to open her heart again. At the funeral, Bethany told stories about Mrs. Garrett's kindness, about how she'd brought two lonely people together and changed both their lives forever. By 1890, the Sullivan Ranch had grown to over 100 acres, and they'd hired on several ranch hands to help with the work. Thomas, now 10 years old, was already showing signs of being a natural rancher, following his father everywhere and learning everything he could about horses and cattle. Sarah, at 8, was more interested in books and learning, and Bethany had started teaching her to read and write, sharing her own love of words and stories. They talked about maybe sending Sarah to a proper school someday, though the thought of her being far away made Bethany's heart ache. On a warm evening in late May of 1891, Aaron and Bethany sat on their porch watching the sunset, much as they had on countless evenings before. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "Do you ever regret it?" Aaron asked suddenly. "Marrying me. Sometimes I think about how young you were, how hurt you were. I wonder if maybe you needed more time." Bethany turned to look at her husband, seeing the gray that was starting to appear in his hair, the lines at the corners of his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, the strong, capable hands that had built their life together. "Not for a single second," she said firmly. "You gave me exactly what I needed, Aaron. Time and patience and steady, unwavering love. You showed me that I could trust again, that I could love again, that I could be happy again. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "You saved yourself," Aaron corrected gently. "I just had the privilege of being there while you did it." "Then we saved each other," Bethany said, taking his hand, "and we built something beautiful together. Look at all this." She gestured at the ranch, at their children, at the life they'd created. "We did this, together." "Together," Aaron agreed, pulling her close and kissing her temple. "Always together." As the sun set over the Texas prairie, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Bethany reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the scared, broken young widow who'd arrived in Amarillo 13 years ago, afraid to trust anyone, afraid to hope for anything better. She thought about the patient cowboy who'd refused to give up on her, who'd shown up day after day, earning her trust one moment at a time until she'd finally been brave enough to let him in. She thought about all the years since, all the moments of joy and struggle, all the ways they'd learned to love each other, to support each other, to build a life together that was stronger than anything they could have built alone. And she thought about the future still ahead of them, all the years they'd have to watch their children grow, to grow old together, to continue building on the foundation they'd laid. "I love you," she said to Aaron, the words as true now as they'd been the first time she'd said them, maybe even more true for all the years and experiences that had deepened them. "I love you too," Aaron replied. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." The children came running up to the porch then, breathless and happy, demanding that their parents come see something they'd found near the creek. Aaron and Bethany exchanged a smile, then followed their children out into the gathering dusk, hand in hand, together as they always were and always would be. Years continued to flow like water, and the Sullivan Ranch prospered beyond anything Bethany and Aaron had dared to dream in those early days. By 1895, they'd expanded to nearly 200 acres, and their horses had earned a reputation throughout Texas for their quality and temperament. Aaron had proven to have a gift for breeding horses that were both beautiful and practical, animals that could work hard all day and still had spirit. Thomas, now 15, was practically running the day-to-day operations of the ranch alongside his father. He'd grown tall and strong, with Aaron's blue eyes and Bethany's determination. He had a natural way with animals that surpassed even his father's considerable skill, and ranchers from across the state had started coming to the Sullivan Ranch specifically to buy horses that Thomas had trained. Sarah, at 13, had indeed gone away to school in Dallas for a year, but she'd missed home too much and returned, declaring that she'd rather help her mother with the ranch business and bookkeeping than memorize Latin poetry. She had a head for numbers that astounded Bethany, and she'd taken over managing the ranch's finances, freeing up Aaron to focus on the horses and cattle. One afternoon in the spring of 1896, Aaron came in from the fields looking thoughtful. Bethany was working on the books with Sarah in the parlor, and she looked up when her husband entered. "What is it?" she asked, recognizing the expression on his face. "I've been thinking," Aaron said, settling into his favorite chair. "Thomas is 16 now, practically a man. Sarah's got the business side of things running better than I ever could. The ranch is doing well, better than well. Maybe it's time we took that trip we've always talked about." Bethany's heart skipped a beat. They'd often talked about traveling, about seeing more of the country, but there had always been reasons to stay, work that needed doing, children who needed raising. "What kind of trip?" Sarah asked, looking up from the ledger she was working on. "I was thinking we could go east," Aaron said. "See New York, maybe, Philadelphia, Washington. Show you kids where this country was born. You too, Bethany, you've never been farther than Fort Worth." The idea was thrilling and terrifying all at once. Leave the ranch, leave Texas. It seemed impossible and yet also exactly right. They'd worked so hard for so long. Maybe they'd earned a little adventure. "The ranch would be fine for a few months," Sarah said practically. "We have good ranch hands. Thomas could stay and oversee things, and I could go with you." "Now wait just a minute," Thomas protested, coming in from the kitchen where he'd apparently been eavesdropping. "Why do you get to go and I have to stay?" "Because you're better with the horses," Sarah said matter-of-factly, "and I'm better with people. Parents will need someone who can navigate cities, and that's me." They debated it good-naturedly for the rest of the evening, but eventually it was decided. Aaron, Bethany, and Sarah would take a trip east in the fall, after the summer work was done but before winter set in. Thomas would stay and mind the ranch, a responsibility he accepted with a mixture of pride and disappointment. That fall, Bethany found herself on a train heading east for the first time in her life, watching the landscape change outside the window as Texas gave way to Louisiana, Louisiana to Mississippi, and onward. Aaron sat beside her, his hand clasped in hers, while Sarah kept up a running commentary on everything she saw, her excitement infectious. They spent 2 weeks in New York City, and Bethany was overwhelmed by the noise and the crowds and the sheer size of everything. But she was also exhilarated. They saw museums and theaters, walked through Central Park, took a ferry around Manhattan. Aaron bought her a beautiful shawl from a fancy department store, and Sarah collected postcards to send to Thomas. In Philadelphia, they walked the same streets where the Founding Fathers had walked, saw the Liberty Bell, and visited Independence Hall. Aaron, who'd always been interested in history, was like a child on Christmas morning, and Bethany fell in love with him all over again watching his enthusiasm. By the time they reached Washington, Bethany was ready to go home, missing Thomas and missing the wide, open spaces of Texas. But she was also glad they'd come, glad they'd taken this time together, glad they'd shown Sarah something of the larger world beyond their ranch. On the train ride home, Sarah fell asleep against the window, and Aaron and Bethany sat together in the gathering darkness, watching the countryside slide past. "Thank you for this," Bethany said quietly. "For the trip, for the adventure, for showing me that we can still do new things, even after all these years." "Thank you for being willing to go," Aaron replied. "I know it wasn't easy for you, leaving the ranch, leaving Thomas. But I wanted you to see that you're brave, Bethany. You're still the bravest person I know." "I learned from the best," Bethany said, squeezing his hand. "You taught me how to be brave, how to trust, how to take chances on happiness." When they arrived back at the ranch, Thomas was waiting at the station with the wagon, grinning from ear to ear. The ranch had run smoothly in their absence, with only minor problems that he'd handled with a maturity that made both his parents proud. Life continued in its comfortable rhythm. Thomas began courting a young woman from town, the daughter of the local banker, and Aaron and Bethany both approved of sweet-natured Emma, who clearly adored their son. Sarah showed no interest in courtship yet, more focused on expanding the ranch's business dealings, talking about maybe raising sheep for wool in addition to their cattle and horses. In 1898, Thomas married Emma in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch, with half the county in attendance. Bethany cried happy tears as she watched her son pledge his life to the woman he loved, and Aaron held her hand throughout the ceremony, both of them remembering their own wedding day nearly 20 years before. Thomas and Emma built a house on the far side of the ranch property, close enough to help with the work but far enough to have their own space, their own life. Within a year, they'd made Bethany and Aaron grandparents with the birth of a daughter they named Bethany, after her grandmother. Holding her tiny namesake for the first time, Bethany was overcome with emotion. She thought about the scared young woman she'd been, so certain that happiness was beyond her reach, so afraid to trust in anything good. And now here she was, surrounded by family, holding her granddaughter, living a life richer and fuller than she'd ever imagined possible. "Thank you," she whispered to Aaron that night as they prepared for bed, "for all of this, for our life, for never giving up on me." "You don't have to thank me," Aaron said, pulling her into his arms. "Loving you, building this life with you, it's been the greatest privilege of my life. You made me better, Bethany. You made everything better." As the new century approached, the Sullivan Ranch was a thriving enterprise. They now had over 300 acres, employed a dozen ranch hands, and their horses were sought after across 3 states. Thomas had taken over most of the daily operations, allowing Aaron to focus on the breeding program and training, the aspects of ranching he loved most. Sarah, now 20, had started a side business breeding and selling sheep, and her wool operation was turning a tidy profit. She'd also started corresponding with a young lawyer in Amarillo, and Bethany suspected there might be a wedding in their future as well. On New Year's Eve of 1899, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the entire Sullivan family gathered at the main ranch house for a celebration. Thomas and Emma were there with little Bethany and their new son, Aaron, named after his grandfather. Sarah came with her lawyer beau, a serious young man named James who clearly hung on her every word. The ranch hands joined them for dinner and dancing, along with neighbors and friends from town. As midnight approached, Aaron pulled Bethany onto the porch, away from the noise and celebration. 21 years, he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they looked out over the ranch. 21 years since we met. Can you believe it? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, Bethany admitted. Sometimes it feels like forever, like I've always known you. Other times it feels like just yesterday that you walked into Mrs. Garrett's boarding house. I was so nervous, Aaron confessed. I saw you that first evening bringing out supper, and I thought you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. But you looked so sad, so closed off. I almost didn't speak to you. But you did, Bethany said, turning in his arms to face him. "You spoke to me, and you kept speaking to me, kept showing up, kept being patient and kind until I finally found the courage to let you in." "Best decision I ever made," Aaron said, kissing her softly. From inside the house they heard the countdown beginning. 10, 9, 8. "Here we go," Aaron said. "A new century, new possibilities." 7, 6, 5. "Same us though," Bethany said. "Same love, same commitment, same team." 4, 3, 2. "Always," Aaron agreed. 1. "Happy New Year." The sound of celebration erupted from inside the house, but Aaron and Bethany stayed on the porch, holding each other, kissing as the new century began, neither of them needing anything more than what they had right there in that moment. The years that followed brought their share of both joy and sorrow. In 1902, Aaron's brother from Kansas came to visit with his family, and it was good for Aaron to reconnect with his past while showing off the life he'd built. In 1904, a terrible drought nearly bankrupted them, but they pulled through by selling off some of their land and downsizing temporarily. In 1906, Sarah married her lawyer James, and they settled in Amarillo where James opened his own practice. Through it all, Aaron and Bethany faced everything together, their love growing stronger with each passing year, each shared challenge, each celebrated triumph. They grew older, their hair turning silver, their bodies slowing down, but their commitment to each other never wavered. By 1910, they had 5 grandchildren between Thomas and Sarah's families, and the ranch house was constantly filled with the sound of children's laughter. Aaron had officially retired from the day-to-day ranch work, handing over the reins to Thomas while he focused on spending time with Bethany and spoiling their grandchildren. On a warm spring evening in 1911, 33 years after they'd first met, Aaron and Bethany sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, Thomas and Emma's oldest teaching the younger ones how to rope a fence post. "You remember that sunset the night I proposed?" Aaron asked, his arm around Bethany's shoulders. "I remember every detail," Bethany said. "I remember being so scared and so hopeful all at once. I remember thinking that I was taking the biggest risk of my life." "And was it worth it?" Aaron asked, though his smile suggested he knew the answer. "Every single moment," Bethany said without hesitation. "Every joy, every struggle, every day we've spent together. Worth it 1,000 times over." "I told you once that I'd earn your trust one day at a time," Aaron said. "I hope I managed that." Bethany turned to look at her husband, this man who'd been her rock for over 3 decades, who'd loved her through her fear and her healing, who'd built a life with her that exceeded her wildest dreams. "You did more than earn my trust," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You taught me how to live again, how to love again, how to believe in happiness again. You gave me everything, Aaron. A home, a family, a purpose. But most of all, you gave me yourself, your unwavering love and support, and that's been the greatest gift of all." Aaron pulled her close, kissing her forehead, and they sat together in comfortable silence as the sun set on another day, another year, another chapter of their beautiful life together. They continued to make memories. Family dinners every Sunday where the table groaned under the weight of Bethany's cooking, and the house rang with laughter and conversation. Quiet mornings on the porch with coffee, still their favorite time of day. Trips into town where everyone knew them and greeted them with respect and affection. Watching their grandchildren grow and thrive, seeing their own love reflected in the strong marriages of their children. As they entered their 60s, both Aaron and Bethany slowed down considerably, but they remained active and engaged with their family and the ranch. They'd built something that would last beyond them, a legacy of love and hard work, and commitment that their children and grandchildren would carry forward. One evening in the summer of 1915, as they sat on their porch watching yet another Texas sunset, Bethany reflected on the journey that had brought them there. 40 years since Thomas had died and her world had fallen apart. 37 years since Aaron had walked into her life and refused to give up on her. 33 years of marriage, of building a life together, of learning and growing and loving. "I wish I could go back," Bethany said softly, "and tell that scared young woman in Amarillo that everything was going to be all right, that she was going to find love again, real love, lasting love, that she was going to be happy." "She wouldn't have believed you," Aaron said with a gentle smile. "She had to live it, had to experience it day by day to really understand." "I suppose you're right," Bethany agreed. "Some things you just have to learn for yourself, some healing you have to do in your own time." "And I'm grateful you took the time you needed," Aaron said. "I'm grateful you let me be part of your healing journey. It's been the honor of my life, Bethany Sullivan, loving you all these years." "The honor has been mine," Bethany replied, taking his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "Every single day." As darkness fell and the stars came out one by one, they remained on the porch, two people who'd found each other when they'd both needed it most, who'd built something beautiful together, who'd proven that love could heal even the deepest wounds and that trust, once earned, could last a lifetime. Their story wasn't dramatic or flashy. It was simply the story of a cowboy who showed up every day and a woman who was brave enough to let him in. It was a story of patience and persistence, of healing and hope, of choosing love over fear again and again, until fear didn't stand a chance. It was a love story in the truest sense, and it would continue in the lives of their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they'd built together, in the example they'd set of what real, lasting love looked like. And as Aaron and Bethany sat together under the vast Texas sky, surrounded by the life they'd created, they knew with absolute certainty that every moment of struggle, every moment of fear, every risk they'd taken had been worth it to end up exactly where they were. Home, together, loved and loving in return.